hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, hello, hello. I do hate these spotlights. Can you hear me at the back? Put your hand up if you can hear me. Put your hand up if you can't hear me. Ha, ha, ha. Sorry, that's a pathetic joke, isn't it? There'll be much worse to come, I'm sure. We're going to hear now from young people about what they think we're doing with the planet they are about to inherit and what they think we ought to do with it. Arguably, until Greta appeared kind of miraculously on the scene, there was very little engagement from young people, the sort of people who are going to have to sort out the mess that we're leaving behind. And that now is changing, I'm very pleased to say. This session is called Our Proposals for a Zero Carbon World. And first of all, we're going to hear 4 demands from the UK Student Climate Network. There are 4 students, each is going, or 3 students, and each is going to speak for about 10 minutes. So I'll be timing that and waving at you if you overstretch. So who's going first? EJ is going to introduce. Well, are you all coming up, or? Yeah, okay, all come up at once then and stand at the lectern, because otherwise people over there can't see you. Are you EJ?
Yes. Hello.
Okay, this is EJ.
Pleasure.
And she's taking over, literally and metaphorically.
Well, maybe giving the mic to me was a mistake. Hello, everyone. My name is EJ, and I am from the Oxford branch of UKSCN, UK Student Climate Network. And I'm joined by my fellow activists, Theo and Xanthi. Now, we are here from Oxford to talk to you about the UKSCN demands. Because there is a lot we could be demanding from you, so just be lucky we managed to narrow it down to 4 this time, otherwise we'd be here all day. So, Theo will be talking about Save the Future, which is our first demand for the British government.
Thank you, EJ. The first demand of UKSCN is to save the future, and for this we need to implement the Green New Deal. It is now clear that we need a bold and radical plan to fight climate change on a scale that we know is necessary. We need to do what is required of us, not what is easy or seems politically possible. The Green New Deal is comprised of 5 principles, the first of which is to totally decarbonise the economy of the UK through a government-led 10-year scheme that includes the infrastructure needed to benefit all communities and workers. The second principle is to create new jobs, millions of well-paid, secure jobs, ensuring sustainable and meaningful livelihoods for all workers, including those in today's high-emission sectors. Thirdly, we need to massively reduce social and economic inequalities with focus on communities that have been the target of historic and current oppression. The fourth principle is to ensure that clean water, clean air, and green spaces are provided to protect and to restore threatened habitats and carbon sinks. And finally, the fifth demand is to build a resilient society prepared for the impacts of climate change, impacts that are now unavoidable. We need to unite and ready ourselves to face these challenges in ways that protect the most vulnerable communities, disabled people, people in low-income or rural communities, and many more besides, which leads on to Xanthi with Teach the Future.
Thank you, Theo. So the second demand of UKSCN is Teach the Future. Teach the Future is a youth-led campaign to urgently repurpose the entire education system around the climate emergency and ecological crisis. Now, between the ages of 6 and 18, students learn about climate change through the various subjects in the curriculum. At the end of Year 8, at 13 years old, students have to pick the subjects they will learn about during their GCSEs. Only in geography and in some aspects of science is climate change really taught. This gives the impression that climate change, which will affect everyone throughout their entire lives, is only relevant to these subjects. But this is clearly not the case. We need to change the way climate change is taught in all aspects of education, from primary school through to higher education and beyond. The fact is that 75% of teachers feel they haven't received adequate training to educate students about climate change, and only 4% of students feel they know a lot about climate change. We need a climate emergency education plan. Education needs to be a centre pillar of the government's net zero plan. Now, the Teach the Future campaign has 4 demands. So the education system needs to be reviewed to prepare young people for the climate emergency and ecological crisis. It calls for changes to teaching standards through retraining and upskilled existing teachers and lecturers. And the campaign also demands funding for youth-led climate social action in every school. Finally, climate change needs to be taught at all schools, colleges and universities, and net zero educational buildings need to be implemented as a national infrastructure priority. So this is really important to me because I'm currently in year 11, and for GCSEs I don't do geography, and I'm doing the lower combined science for GCSEs. So basically I don't really learn, I learn the minimal facts about climate change in school, and I've mostly been educated about it through the things I'm involved with outside of school, like this movement. We are in the 6th mass extinction due to the climate and ecological crisis, and it is terrifying, but it is even more terrifying when you don't learn about it at school, which you do 5 days, 9 hours every day. This is why movements such as UKSCN are so empowering to be a part of, as you get together and take action with like-minded people. Now, speaking of empowering the future with like-minded people, I will now hand over to EJ, who is talking about the 3rd and 4th demands of UKSCN.
Right, me again. You're welcome. So, tell the future. That's our 3rd demand. So, it's not just enough to educate young people about the climate crisis, because although we are pretty great, we don't hold most of the political power, and it would take time to seep through into the rest of society. So we call on the government to communicate the severity of the ecological crisis to the general population, to voters, to people who hold the political power. They need to know the necessity to act now. All of you need to know the necessity to act now. It shouldn't just be young people like Greta, like me, like Xanthi, like Theo, who are out here telling you that this is severe. The government needs to step up and do their jobs, because their job is to serve us, not to rule, it's to protect us. So they need to protect us, they need to tell the truth, they need to tell the future. Now, what use would all of the education that we're getting for both young people and older people be if we didn't have some way to empower ourselves and use that information? That is why the 4th demand is empower the future. So young people need to be included in policy making. At the moment, it is so hard for a young person to feel like they can use their voice. I know that it wasn't until Greta came along with her amazing idea of fighting the climate crisis by taking the fight to the government and striking from school. It wasn't until then that I realized the power that I held. And yet I still couldn't vote. I was 13 days too young to vote in the most recent general election. No one should be excluded from participating in our democracy. So we call for proportional representation. We call for votes at 16. We call for getting rid of the limiting factors, such as having a permanent address, which prevent people from being able to vote. So many people who are vulnerable, people who are homeless, people who are disabled, often really struggle to be able to make themselves heard in our democracy, and that is not acceptable. So all of that must be changed. We believe in system change, and right now this system needs to be changed. First past the post means that people are forced to vote tactically. I know people where I lived felt very disenfranchised because they couldn't vote for the party they loved. So we need to be proportional. We need to let people know that their vote counts, because otherwise they're going to disengage. I know so many people who just refuse to vote because they think it's not worth it. So we need to empower everyone and to empower the future. All of our demands link together. All of them. We need to save the future. We need to teach the future. We need to tell the future, and we need to empower the future if we want a future. So, those are our demands. It's up to you what you do with them. Will you take the fight to the government? Will you take it to your local representatives? Will you talk to your MP? Or will you say, that's not my problem? What will you do? I put it to you to figure out. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Guys, just stick around for a second, if you would. Can I ask you, EJ, first? I mean, my guess is, let me just try a little experiment. So of the people in the audience, how many of you would consider you are already highly engaged in climate change in some way or form? Any of you who don't give a damn? So, just kind of trying to show you that these guys are your friends. They're not your enemies. But can I ask you about where were we? Oh yes, about votes at 16. Is that absolutely necessary to achieve climate change goals for people to be able to have to vote at 16?
The mic's on? Yeah. Well, you could argue that about anything. You could say, is worker and social justice really relevant and really needed when it comes to achieving climate justice? But when it comes down to it, young people are some of the most active, but also some of the most disenfranchised people. So yes, I think it is needed, because you have to show people, you have to make that first step, you have to show us, yes, we are listening, yes, we understand the severity of it. So although it might not be the first thing on our list, it is still very important.
Okay, let me ask you again about you saying the government wasn't communicating the severity of it. I mean, Parliament has voted to agree that there is a climate change emergency. Whenever I hear Michael Gove on this topic, he talks about the climate emergency. It's not a phrase I use myself, actually, because I think emergency is a difficult word in this context. But Parliament is saying that, the government is bringing forward initiatives. I mean, in what way are they failing, do you think?
Well, setting 2050 as the deadline is the only example of a failure you really need. But
see what I mean?
yeah, thank you. Lovely audience, by the way. Love all of you. But just declaring a climate emergency isn't good enough. You have to have the action behind it. I know that my local MP, Layla Moran, has been really eager to push through climate change action through Parliament, and she feels like she's not being listened to. We feel like she's not being listened to, and like we're not being listened to. So it's all well and good to say there's an emergency, but if the corner of the room is on fire and you just say, oh, there's a fire, and don't actually do anything to stop it, then what are you even doing? You can't say that you're acting.
Okay, thank you. Just pass the mic to Zanti for a minute. Zanti, I want to ask you about education. So when did I give up sciences? I think I gave up all sciences aged 14 and didn't do anything useful in science until I started my job, when I suddenly had to realize I did need to know a little bit about science. There will be loads of people like me who are good at languages, good at English. I mean, how are you going to get them to do climate change stuff? Do you want climate change plots woven into stuff? Isn't that a bit kind of intrusive and false?
Yeah, so some subjects it might be quite hard to, because say in French, one of the subjects we talk about climate change, but a lot of people don't properly know what that is. I ask them, and they kind of, so with my climate activism with the strikes, they say why am I doing this? And for the first couple, they were like, oh yeah, we'll go along, and then afterwards they were like, oh, are you still doing this? And it's like, yes, because nothing's changed. And I think if you teach them more about what it is, and yes, I might not be great at science, but I think I should still learn equally high level science and what I can do.
Sure, but I mean, a lot of teenagers, frankly, are not interested. I mean, we say that the youth is interested, but the truth is a fraction of youth is interested, and a lot of other people are interested in meeting boys or girls, or trying to get into the pub underage, or smoking a spliff, or playing on video games, to be frank.
Yeah, that is true.
Okay.
Yeah, so are a lot of adults, I guess.
So indeed there are a lot of adults. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
And we're going to now to hear from Lynn Seeney from North Hertfordshire College, who's going to present some material from students there.
Good afternoon. I'm a governor at North Hertfordshire College. We're a further and higher education college, and we run courses for school leavers, apprentices and adults. And in particular, relevant to today, we have students studying engineering, construction and motor vehicle technology at our dedicated campus. So our students learn things like brickwork, plastering, electrical, carpentry and plumbing, all of which is directly relevant to the future of the built environment, because our guys really are the workforce of the future. And they were really pleased to be asked to be involved today because they're not very often asked for their views, particularly about their trades and profession, and yet they are critical to the future of the built environment. And they have very strong views on the climate challenge and other environmental issues. So we asked them some questions, and some of them volunteered, that's inverted commas, to be videos, and others gave us their views to be reported back in writing. So in their own words, I'll just ask you to watch this short video, what some of the things they're thinking about.
Well, to be honest, I'd quite like to see some buildings with a lot of solar panels and something that's cost effective to the environment.
I suppose it's a lack of incentive, really, to adopt these new ways of it's cost-effective and environmentally friendly ways. And I think that's partly due to a lack of public information and a lack of affordability.
The barriers would be, I'd say that people are the costs of like doing it, and maybe it's like people doing things they're not used to, so they have to learn a different way. And it'll make people more aware of what the effects of their actions and how it will affect the environment as well as other people. And then they can find out what they're doing wrong and how they can improve. Maybe offer incentives so people can have a reason to do it, because of people generally react to incentives. The saying goes, incentives drives behaviour.
So we asked them then, for those who didn't want to be videoed, some of the thoughts that they had around what sort of buildings they'd like to see in the future, and that's those that they're going to be working on, as well as those that they'll be living on, and the places that they are. It was really interesting. They had some very clear ideas about technologies, but they were also very clear that there needed to be a look at existing buildings, such as the ones they live in now, not just the ones that we're thinking about producing in the future. And the idea of self-sufficient buildings, which were much more self-reliant, was very strong. We also asked them about barriers, and it was particularly interesting for some of our students because they will work in very small businesses or family-owned businesses. And one of the points that they made quite strongly was, as a young person, how do I tell my uncle that he's doing it wrong? How do I actually help persuade an older workforce to do things in a different way? It can't all come from young people. They were also very clear again on the issue of cost and cost effectiveness, because they're the guys who have to sell this at the front line. They're the guys that talk directly to the householder who's going to buy their services or isn't. So cost is really, really important to them. We also asked them about manufacturers and product makers. And one of the clear things that came through was walk the talk. Don't just talk about it. You need to do it in your own manufacturer as well. But also that manufacturers have a critical role to play in educating the workforce so they know what's available and what's out there, and that isn't necessarily being done at the moment, and particularly in colleges and in places where people are learning. How do we get people who are pushing the envelope and who are innovative to bring their products and services in so that students can learn about them? We asked them then about education, and a similar point to the one that the Oxford group made earlier. Need to learn much more about climate change and much more about sustainability throughout the education system, not just in dedicated courses. It needs to be fairly mainstream. And they're really, really key that they want to catch people at a younger age. And then government. There was a lot of talk about how government needs to actually incentivise this to happen, and some of that's going to have to come through laws and legislations. It's not just going to happen because people think it's a good idea for reasons that they discussed earlier. They were also very critical about some of the speed of change, so they're just being asked to learn about electric vehicles, and now the government's talking about hydrogen vehicles. So where's it going? How do they keep current? How do they know that what they're being taught now is actually going to be relevant to what they do when they go out into the workplace? And they felt this quite strongly. So finally, it was a very interesting exercise for the tutors and the staff at North Harts, and they felt that it wasn't enough to just record the views of the students. They thought that actually they should do something themselves as well. So this is a pledge that North Harts College have made, which is directly really arising from the invitation to come to Future Build today. So on behalf of the college, we are very, very grateful for Future Build for inviting us to be part of today and for making it possible for some of our students to attend. And just a quick thanks to all the students who were quite nervous but actually put themselves forward to be part of this. So thank you very much for the opportunity today.
Thank you. Lynn, just hang on just a sec.
Oh dear, I thought I'd escaped.
Not so fast. Look, you've raised loads of issues to her. I'm the son of a builder and the brother of 2 property developers, and my best friends are architects. This is damn difficult. You know, you talked about the products, for instance, at the end there, knowing which products to use, how to keep up to date. I remember I was reporting 5 years ago that heat pumps were going to be the solution, and then people discovered problems with heat pumps. Now heat pumps have made a comeback on the public agenda, but we may be using them in hybrid fashion with hydrogen boilers. It's such a massive task, climate change, across every sphere, and this is just one tiny sphere we're talking about here. Is it possible, is it really realistic to think that people can keep up? Aren't we inevitably going to be dragging behind?
I think it's going to be quite tricky, particularly for people in very small enterprises and small businesses. And the construction industry is made up of a lot of very, very small firms. So it's going to be quite critical to make sure that there's information available, because I don't think any one individual or one individual small firm will be able to do that. But we do have a massive online repository that we can use.
We do, but look out here. You spend a quarter of an hour walking around here and you would be absolutely bewildered as to what was the best product to use. Yeah. Should you go for timber frame? Should you do concrete frame? You name it.
And who's making the decision
as well? Who's making the decision?
Yeah. Yeah, I think education is a massive ask. It also is, how do you deal with lifelong learning? So if you push someone into the workforce at 19 with their apprenticeship, do they learn nothing again until they retire?
Yes.
Well, how does that happen? How do we incentivise that? How do we give them time out? What do we do with apprentices? What do we do with CPD? If you take time off work and you don't get paid, why are you going to go? You know, we have to find a way of delivering education throughout the career of people working in the built environment.
Pity the government isn't here represented. Anyway, thank you very much. Interesting thoughts.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Theo, the other one. This is Cloud and this is Rihanna, and we're from Lincolnshire Climate Conscious students. We've travelled today from Lincolnshire to speak to you about the importance of working productively about the climate crisis and what you can do as individuals. I'd like to hand over to Cloud first.
Hello. I'm here today to talk to you all about the importance of the community when tackling climate change. Encouraging communities to work together and spread awareness sets an example for others to follow, inevitably unifying whole countries and making a big impact. In addition to this, it makes the topic less overwhelming for people to understand. The main message that our group wants to convey is that it is extremely important that we work positively and productively to make a difference. Organising events that engage the community can help gain attraction to the movement. By introducing this topic through events such as litter picking, we are making a positive contribution to the local environment, whilst also teaching the importance of the climate crisis and what we can do individually to help. Again, this can make the movement less divided and more unified. A common misconception that many people have is that we, as individuals, don't make much of a difference. They believe that the crisis can only be solved by abolishing large companies, and that our contribution to greenhouse gases have a non-existent impact. I completely disagree. We all share responsibility for the climate change, some more than others. But this doesn't mean that we can't do everything in our power to campaign for a better future. When we work together, we make a much bigger difference. Thank you.
The importance of working with government on all levels can be seen for their knowledge within their area. Local councils have the resources to do what's best. They should have the power to plant more trees, build electric vehicle chargers, and switch their area to renewable energy. These measures need to be put in place, and the only way we can achieve this is through working productively with them. We have the power to become a carbon neutral world as soon as possible. It's not all on the government, it's up to us to influence them further and push them and work with them. Schools can also educate pupils. We are the future, and they need to be paving the way and presenting students with solutions to the climate crisis, which Xanthi mentioned about earlier. The same could also be said about national government. It's pivotal that they work with consumers at the closest level possible so they can collectively influence policy at the highest level. The new National Climate Citizens Assembly is a great step in the right direction, but citizens should become a lot more wildly involved with this, as climate change will affect us all. Not only this, but government should work with companies as well. Help them reduce their own emissions, connect with other companies that offer solutions to the climate crisis. The UK can become the hub of climate technological development, and a lot of the great companies with stands all around us have shown this today. The potential is there to happen. We all need to work together to tackle the climate crisis. We have the power to influence it, reduce emissions sooner and as much as we can. It really does affect us all. Thank you.
Productivity, collaboration and efficiency are vital parts to solving any problems, and climate change is no exception. If anything, these three skills should be even more important, as the climate crisis only gets worse over time. Without productivity, we cannot accomplish anything, and we are left powerless against our own species. Working fast can slow the increase in near-term global warming by as much as 0.6 degrees by 2050. This has the potential to play a huge part in preventing the extinction of species worldwide and preventing the sea levels from rising too rapidly. To be productive, we need to hold events on a wider scale. For example, 200 world leaders attended COP25 and 30,000 delegates are going to be attending COP26 in Glasgow this November. 2020 has said to be the year of climate actions, meaning COP26 will be one of the biggest climate conferences yet. This massive conference will clearly show the plans that each country has come up with to reduce their carbon emissions. COP26 presents so many great opportunities, and a large-scale international diplomatic collaboration is necessary in ensuring it is successful in doing the best it can to champion carbon reduction. We need to push them in the right direction, show them what we want to be achieved from COP26, because time is running out to make this change happen. Seize the opportunities. As an individual, you can help us to all work productively. Contact any local MPs that have any power and influence them to make a difference. Show your leaders how much of an issue this is before it's too late. Thank you.
Well, just stay a minute, guys. Rihanna, just step back a sec, if you would. Tell me what you guys are doing to try to influence people locally.
We regularly talk to our local MPs, such as our local Conservative MP Matt Warman, and we try and influence them into making decisions.
Is he receptive?
Pardon?
Is he receptive?
Sometimes.
What do you ask him to do?
Pardon?
What do you ask him to do?
We want him to make our voices heard and the young people's voices heard, and just anyone really campaigning for climate change.
Okay, what do you think?
I think as well, councils, as I mentioned in my speech, have a massive influence. As local people, we'll listen to them a lot more and take their words with the knowledge that local councils have of the area and how climate change will impact them.
And has your local council declared a climate emergency?
Yes.
Does it know what that means?
Yes. Boston Borough Council in December, after working with our organisation very closely and other local environmental activists, did declare a climate emergency. And they've also put measures such as electric vehicle charging and tree planting in place, following what concerns people raise. And they hold their own mini citizens' assembly as well.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. And I do apologise for getting it the wrong place in the running order, but thank you anyway.
Thank you.
And now it's Fanny's turn. Taking action going forward, Fanny Everard, co-founder of What About Waste?
Thank you very much. So yes, my name is Fanny Everard. I'm from Belgium, and I'm the co-founder of What About Waste. So What About Waste is an association that fights against single-use plastics in restaurants and cafes. Why did we choose restaurants and cafes? Because there are people that really want change but really don't have the time. In addition to that, I'm an intern at Easy Fairs in sustainability, and Easy Fairs is the organizers of Future Build. So the reason why I'm here is because we need more practical things to be implemented to get real change. It's very nice to have conversations, continuous conversation about climate change. But what we really need is that these words become action. I really want to emphasize the importance of action at every single level. Like my fellow students here said, it's about education, and I agree. But so many industries have a huge impact on climate change, and the construction industry is one of them. What about financial institutions? Don't they have all the money to invest or in fossil fuels, or on the other hand, in renewables? And what about the government? We all know there's a climate issue. But what are we truly doing? And when I say we, I heard this audience is a very friendly one. I'm talking about every single actor on this planet. And I don't want to have a negative message. There are some good things happening, like the European Green Deal, like Future Build. But I have some suggestions moving forward. I suggest the youth is being heard a little bit more, and that the youth and officials for COP26, for example, start working together. We need intergovernmental collaboration, intergenerational, collaboration. The UK is hosting COP26. Good. Well, Mary Robinson, first female Prime Minister of Ireland, said to The Guardian really recently that there was a lack of leadership within the government to take on the responsibility of climate change. And that is really damaging and quite scary, to be honest. The youth needs to feel like it is being heard. And I have a small personal story to share about What About Waste and our association. We started off by reducing single-use plastics in restaurants, and we used the plastic straw, as a symbol for our movement. We were busy for, I think, a year before we got contacted by the Ministry of the Environment in Brussels. A little email saying, listen, what you're doing is great and you have a lot of motivation. We don't have the time to do this. If you want, we can finance your campaign and you will do the action. That's a great collaboration, and we need that more. The youth has the motivation and you probably have the finances, and we need to see that more and more if we want real change to happen. We are in 2020. We don't have a lot of years to take action. The government is really responsible for setting an example. It is really important to tell people to be exemplary citizens, but if there's not an example as the government, nothing will happen. I mean, the government can tell us to be exemplary citizens, but if they continuously finance fossil fuels and CO2 heavy industries, what's their message? How are we young people supposed to understand this? So to conclude, my message is the generation in power today has the experience and probably the finances, but the younger generation has the motivation and the energy. So let's work together. And I'm more than happy to talk to you a bit later about what we can do all together. You have the future in your hands. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have with us on the panel Jamie Agombar, who's Head of Sustainability for the NUS and who leads on Teach for the Future. We have Baroness Rosie Boycott, who's Chairman of Feeding Britain and Veg Power and lots of other wonderful things. And we have Matt Toombs from the COP26 unit, which sits in the Cabinet Office and is working out what the UK's position on COP26 should be, and probably indeed whether we should have it at all given the state of viral UK. It's a little bit difficult because people over there can't see the panel. Maybe we'll ask people on the panel to stand up when they're speaking. Shall we start with Jamie? Jamie, could you stand up and offer some thoughts on what you've just heard?
Yes, thanks. So I work for the National Union of Students, the representative organisation of 7 million students in tertiary education. We've recently set up a new charity called Students Organising for Sustainability, and the clue is in the acronym SOS. We want to go a lot further and faster with our sustainability work. Quite a few people are very critical of the education system. We heard it from the young people so far, but there's a really great activist academic in the US called David Orr, who says that the education system is routinely equipping people to be better, more effective vandals of the planet. And he says it isn't the world's poorest people that are doing the damage, it's actually those with BAs and MAs and BScs. And our own Jonathan Porritt from this country says we should be using our universities to prepare young people for the work of the world, not just the world of work. And that drive to get people employable and just to slot them into society doing what we already do is not what we need. We need young people to go and change the systems and make us more sustainable. And it could be argued that our education system is the root cause of society's drive for self-interest and short-term profit, which ultimately is how we've made ourselves into an unsustainable society. And our education system, certainly in the younger years, teaches us that sustainability is something for geographers and maybe scientists. It isn't something which is for everybody. It routinely teaches us to recite knowledge rather than to apply it, and it teaches us to compete with our fellow pupils rather than collaborate with them. And when you go to university, one of the league tables assesses university success on how much their graduates go on to earn, not actually the good that they do throughout their career. So what we're trying to do with Teach the Future, and we heard from Xanthi earlier, is we're hoping to liberate sustainability from a few niche subjects and try and mainstream it or weave it through all that is taught. We're trying to reframe it a bit like equality. Equality isn't a subject, it's a principle, and living sustainably should be a principle. It should be woven through everything that we learn. We're actually taking, for once, a lead from the US on this, which is strange given what's happening with them in climate change now. But in the space race, 11 years before they put man on the moon, they passed the US Defense Education Act. And it was the biggest single investment the education system has ever seen around the world. And it was all around STEM. And the average age of the people in the control tower on the day they landed on the moon was 28. And it was credited with the investment in the education system, the can-do attitude of young people, and a really compelling vision. We're going to go to that thing we can see in the sky. And I'd argue that the young people have a compelling vision for what society needs to do. They're certainly motivated. You know, they don't say we tried that before, it won't work. They've got the can-do attitude. What we now need is the big investment in the education system. Xanthi very eloquently outlined what we're trying to do with Teach the Future, so I won't go through that now. But just to say that the young people have really thought about this and they've come up with their asks. They've even costed it up. They think it will cost 23 billion to make all of our educational buildings from early years through to adult education net zero by 2030. They're asking for that to be an infrastructural priority for the government, and they're asking the government to make some of those other commitments in the run-up to COP. So we can actually go into COP and show some great leadership and show that our education system is on the forefront of the world's thinking around what education's purpose is. And I'm pleased to report that on Monday, some of the young people are meeting with Gavin Williamson, the Secretary of State for Education, following their successful parliamentary reception last week, in which they engaged about 70 MPs around the ask to teach the future. Thank you.
Okay, Jamie, just stay for a second. I want to ask you the same question that I asked Xanthi, was how do you weave climate change into, say, French, without it sounding like some sort of Stalinist diktat?
Well, languages is an interesting one. I've heard people say you shouldn't just be teaching about sustainability, you should be teaching for sustainability. So that isn't just knowledge, it's also competencies, it's values, it's attributes, and it might be looking at interesting French scholars or talking about the climate emergency in French could be one way to do it. But what we're trying to do really is make it something which applies across the curriculum, across all forms of education.
You know, look, I'm sympathetic, geography, obviously, maths, physics, biology, obviously, or maybe not maths so much, but you could get some statistical stuff in with maths, physics, biology, and chemistry, yeah. But then what about all the other history? It just feels like you're kind of shoehorning it in. It does feel a bit communist.
Well, we don't want it to be done unsympathetically. We don't want to make it feel as if this isn't natural. But we do want to bring the teachers with us. And I think Xanthi mentioned earlier a statistic from the Oxfam and UKSCN survey last year that 75% of teachers felt they didn't know enough about the climate emergency to teach it. So what we need to do firstly is, if you will, retrofit the right knowledge into the teachers and get them to realise that this is incredibly important to the people they're teaching. And then when they're as passionate about it as the young people are, I'm sure they'll find ways to teach about it in an interesting way. What we also realise from a lot of anecdotal evidence is that young people want to learn about sustainability, and if you teach through sustainability, you're more likely to get the students' interest and attention. And if you can link sustainability to academic achievement, then there's no reason why this shouldn't be mainstream through everything that is taught.
I was very interested in your comments about how how students are rewarded. And we were lucky enough to have a year's sabbatical in the States. My son, at then age 14, went to American school, and there seemed to be a completely different emphasis. It was on being a good citizen. So your academic work scored a certain amount, but then you got a certain amount for attendance, a certain amount whether you were a decent person to have in the school, whether you helped your fellows, whether you cooperated, that sort of thing. I mean, that would be a radical change in the UK, but I mean, clearly there's no point the UK just churning out an entire generation of bankers who earn 8,000 squillion pounds a year and spend it all on luxury yachts.
I completely agree. In the US, we can learn things from whether it's the Defence Education Act or their specific view of citizenship education. But what is clear is that the education system over here needs to respond to the climate emergency. It can't just treat it as something that you get a few hours about in science at GCSE. It needs to be mainstream. And specifically in tertiary education, there's real movements of students now, such as the postgraduate economics students in Manchester, who are calling for significant change to what they're taught, because they're paying their £9,000. They are the consumers of their education, but also the products, and they're turning out saying, well, that was a waste of money. I haven't learned what I need to do to change society. So there is a demand for the change. It's just a matter of when it comes.
Okay, thank you. Rosie, let's hear a few thoughts from you about what you've heard from the young people.
Right, can I just... Sorry, I've got bits of paper. First of all, thank you all very, very much for having us. And you've all been amazing, and it's been fantastic to hear the young people's thoughts and ideas and the passion. And I'm particularly keen on the notion of doing those joint ventures that Fanny talked about, like the idea that you were funded to take the plastic straw campaign is really great, and that's something that we can pick up. So I'm here because I'm a member of Peers for the Planet. This is a group that was founded not that long ago by two crossbench peers in the House of Lords, and it's now got over 100 members, and we have a fantastic secretariat which is growing, and it has very simple remits. We have three main demands that we want to make. One is that we want to try to see climate consideration go into all legislation. So in a way that does cover the things we've been talking about today. That would cover building regulations, that would cover the educational standards that we have in the country. At the moment we have a particular batch of bills coming towards us, like the fisheries bill, which obviously has massive climate concerns. I work, as Roger said, I work a lot in food and food policy and food poverty. We have the agriculture bill coming, and while that is it's a big opportunity for rethinking agriculture, which in my book always gets rather a rough deal around the COPs and the climate groups, because it actually contributes 30% to all our emissions, and yet it's never, ever within any targets. And as to what agriculture has done to biodiversity, it is the primary cause. It is probably 75% of the cause of ecological destruction, and yet it doesn't at the moment come under any worldwide rules in the reduction of chemicals, agri-farming, and so this is something that I personally am massively involved in. But Peers for the Planet is also doing really interesting work, and we've touched a tiny bit on finance around pensions. Finance, I think, is, in a way, our big hope, and I've been talking to a lot of business leaders, interesting ideas like, can you, if you divest yourself of an investment that was in fossil fuels, can you come out of that investment, move into green tech, green energy, and not pay capital gains on your profits? Can we see a situation where banks start saying you can't we're not going to give you loans on diesel cars? Or actually in future, we're not giving you loans on cars at all. There is enormous amount of scope. So where we see ourselves in Peers for the Planet is that we sit at the tail end of the legislation. At the moment, we have a government with a gigantic majority. That's not news to everybody. So it may be that a lot of our efforts, in the end, the amendments we put forward don't get through. But that won't be for want of trying, and that won't be from the want of the fact that more and more people join our group. Now, our next big thing we want to do is the understanding that climate change is not ours alone. It's a worldwide thing. All of us in the House of Lords are in the incredibly privileged position, which is we don't have to fight an election in 2 years' time or 5 years' time or wherever it is. We are therefore not beholden to really difficult questions like, in our constituency, a lot of the industry is coming from dirty industry, arms industry, car industries, mining, all these things. We actually can make links, and we're doing it. There's a similar group to ours just being set up in the Senate in America. We can make links around the world in much the same way that the students and the school kids are making links around the world. And, we in our vision would be able to walk and talk and march with you to say, this is what we care about. And also, of course, all of us are, well, many of us, I'm not yet a grandmother, but I hope to be one day, this is about our responsibility and what we've left behind. And thirdly, we see that it is absolutely critical that we get your voices into Parliament and we get your voices heard. And while we want to see, obviously, climate change put at the top of all political the agendas, the challenges are about political will. I mean, it's perfectly true. If you looked at I don't know if anyone's read Jonathan Safran Foer's book, We Are the Weather, and he has an extraordinary first chapter in which he talks about what happened in America the day after Pearl Harbor, the day after America joined the war. And they put America on a war footing, not next year or even next week, but tomorrow. They recreated the notion of a country being assaulted and being bombed by flying bombers over the Midwest at night with blackout curtains, so that the whole country understood that it was their responsibility to make this work. And he begs the question and asks the question, to what degree does the climate crisis have to get? How bad does it have to get before we all understand we are all in this together? And it doesn't matter what business we do or where we live, it's going to affect us in not good ways. So I think that as politicians, we have a huge amount we can do, but I would also hasten to say we are also limited in the House of Lords. We can fight, we can argue, we can raise our voices. At the end of the day, our amendments can be turned down. But that said, We will win, we will do things, and I think it's really important, again, to go back to what Fanny said. I think the individual counts enormously. I think industry often wants to say that the individual effort, because they don't want you to not buy their thing or not fly or to, carry on with your habits. The individual efforts don't matter. They do. It's very convenient to say that they don't, but they do. And no big movements or political change ever happen without everybody being involved. So it's great to see you all, and I'm going to go and look around the exhibition, and thank you for having us.
Thank you. Tell me, Rosie, thank you. I mean, there's obviously a lot going on. These guys who've come to see us today, they might well ask, oh, well, she's in the House of Lords. What do our voices mean in the House of Lords? I mean, when you hear voices like this, I mean, does it have an impact on you, or do you just think, oh, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? And is there more of an influence between people who are acting in an organised way like this, or young people who are just kind of nagging their parents, pushing their parents to do more?
Well, the answer is yes. I think in what I said at the end, that all individual voices work. I mean, Greta, without a doubt, has had an enormous impact, both on individuals and on
politics. She is
politics.
disparaged by some people in the House of Lords.
Yes, she is.
Call her an insignificant little something.
And also
or other.
she is disparaged, and Extinction Rebellion is sometimes disparaged as causing a traffic problem. Yeah, this happens. We are still in this. I mean, I think we know this. Last year, our emissions were the highest that they've ever been, and we had fossil fuel emissions, and then on top of it, all the green energy. We are still growing. The planet is still going in the wrong direction, but that is not a reason to be defeatist. And yes, I do think, and the question of whether we vote at 16 or 18, the point is that this generation is going to be voting very soon. And we all know that the way to give MPs courage to swim against the tide is the sense that their constituents are with them. And things are moving. You're going to hear from Matt now about the COP and where the government's commitment's going to be. I have days where I feel very pessimistic and days where I feel more optimistic.
Is this a good day or a bad day?
It's middle.
Okay.
I had a late night.
Thank you.
But anyway, thank you.
Okay. So let's hear now from one of the people who's going to take us to a triumphal note at the COP, or not, as the case may be.
Thank you very much, and it's great to have a chance to come here. So, there's a lot in what's been said already, which I'd like to pick up on, and particularly around the focus on action, the focus on pledges, the focus on what we can all do as individuals is incredibly important. I thought I'd just come here, so I'm part of the team in the Cabinet Office that's helping organise the COP, which is going to be in Glasgow this November. As people have been saying, so 2020, this is obviously a really important year. It's a really important year in terms of the planet. It's an important opportunity for us as hosts of the COP in Glasgow. We know that the science is really clear, and the need for action is really now. This year particularly is important because it's 5 years ago that the Paris Agreement happened, that world leaders came together. I think, as others have said, you had almost 200 world leaders in Paris committing for the first time to tackling climate change, setting a very clear goal of limiting mean temperature rises below 2 degrees and striving for 1.5 degrees. So a very clear commitment, but now I think, as everyone here has been saying, it's about action, and that's what's needed. This is 5 years on. This is the point where all 196 countries are expected to come back with their updated national plans, their nationally determined contributions. This is where they come back and they set renewed and revised emissions targets, but importantly also the action plans that sit behind that. And we'll need those plans to be as ambitious as possible, and we'll need as many of those to be committing towards net zero. This is a huge challenge. It is also an opportunity in the way that it opens a chance to reshape the economy, to do it in a fair way, to do it in a way that avoids harm that can be avoided. A number of people have talked about collaboration, the importance of being able to work together as a way of tackling this crisis. Certainly, I mean, for this to be any sort of success, it needs to involve citizens, it needs to involve investors, businesses, cities, regions, as well as countries. So this process is not just a government national process. So in terms of its presidency, the UK is going to work with all parties across the world to tackle the impacts of climate change. So in terms of stepping up access to finance and expertise on resilience and adaptation, particularly in working with the most vulnerable countries and communities. So working with communities and countries in terms of protecting and restoring natural habitats, ecosystems, which is crucial around biodiversity, where China will be hosting a biodiversity conference just before the UK hosts the climate COP. We'll be working with businesses, countries and international organisations around transitions of energy, so looking to really accelerate the transition around clean energy, take advantage of the falling cost of renewables and the innovations in energy storage and in this space. We'll be looking to really speed up and accelerate the efforts to phase out diesel and petrol engines and to drive forward the commitments towards zero-emission vehicles across the world, building sufficient commitments in markets that really drive the global economy. And then a number of people have mentioned finance. So I think that is a critical element where the UK can really show some leadership, but also make a difference on both public and private finance, on greening the finance system as a whole and making sure that those countries that need investment most can access sources of finance for them. So the UN process that this is part of is a critical way of bringing together all the different countries. We will be working with all 196 countries as part of this. Is important, as people have said already, that everyone plays their part. I think we've mentioned before this will be the biggest summit the UK's ever hosted. It's a challenge logistically, but it's a real kind of opportunity of bringing together as many people as possible around this. Alongside this as well, the UK is going to host something called the Year of Climate Action, which is making sure that we as a country take advantage of the opportunity of hosting this conference. And I think, as is really clear from this session here, the voice of young people is so important and has made a huge impact already on the views of governments across the world, and we need governments to listen to your voice. So thank you for asking me to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I ask, I'm not sure whether this is in your remit or not, but some environment groups have been saying that the UK won't have any credibility at the COP unless it's shown it is on track for all its medium-term carbon goals, which at the moment it isn't. It's missing its 4th and 5th climate change budget targets. Have you got a thought on that, or would you be allowed to express a thought on that?
So, I think it's right that the UK is on track on budgets 1, 2 and 3, but not on 4 and 5. It's going to be important for the UK to set out how it's going to achieve net zero in the run-up to the COP, to be able to provide that leadership and to show that this is not just about targets, this is actually about action.
Do you think that can be possible? Because, this last year, emissions from cars have actually gone up because people are switching out of more efficient diesel cars, which are more polluting, into less polluting but more fuel-hungry petrol cars. And SUV sales are outnumbering electric vehicle sales by 14 to 1 since George Osborne. I know he's not your man, I know, but since he changed the tax differential, don't they have to do something about that?
So I think
I don't want to make you Chancellor for the day, but what?
It's very kind of you. So I think we're at the beginning of a transition, which is not just in the UK, but is global in terms of the transition to zero electric vehicles. And I think that is going to accelerate very, very quickly. And I think it is a question of scale. So as if we can use this COP process to bring enough markets to send a very clear signal to manufacturers that this is the future, this is the way it will move, that will accelerate the action that manufacturers take, and individuals taking decisions in in purchases, I think is likely to accelerate very quickly as well.
Don't ministers actually need to send a very clear signal to SUVs that people should stop buying them, ideally?
So, I mean, the signal around phasing out petrol and diesel engines is a really clear signal, and the markets are starting to move behind it. So, I mean, I do think that most of these manufacturers operate on really large global scales. So, if they can get a signal from enough different countries that this is the future, and the future is absolutely towards the end of the internal combustion engine, that will drive very quick behaviour and change.
I just worry that this conversation is a bit unsophisticated. So, for instance, you could make a lot of gains by having smaller, lighter vehicles rather than bigger, heavier vehicles. But look, I'm not going to give you a hard time because I know you're not here as a politician. So, thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you.
Now, let's have some comments or questions from the floor. Yes, sir. The first hand, and then a woman here in the blue. So, man here with his hand up, and then the woman in the light blue denim top.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, I've been here for the last few days, and everyone's talking about circular economy and whole life cycle, and lots of different terminologies. And it was said that about helping the developing countries and how other countries need to do more. I just have to tell you that with my roots in Africa and India, the people, especially the indigenous people, they've been doing for hundreds of years the most work for environmental protection. I mean, they're regarded as the main original protectors of the earth. But in terms of, I'm not indigenous roots, but in terms of the contribution to the ills of the planet, I can tell you that the women and the men and the children are doing a heck of a lot for climate change in India. And the way they're doing that is in my state, in Jharkhand, which is northeast state of India, there are some aspects which are mining coal, but actually the minerals that they're increasingly mining is the minerals that you need for electric cars and solar panels. Now, the problem is that a positive contribution or a negative one? Because those people who are mining the minerals are working there as slaves, and they are indentured labor. And you've got 5, 6-year-old children working there, picking up pieces of lithium like it's Lego, thinking that they can chew on them. Now, I would like to position this question to the people on the panel. I would like to have the students just hear me out, because I'm not expecting them to know this. I just want to listen to observe.
Just be very brief now,
Yeah,
because it's a long speech.
Yeah, but the question is that none of this is renewable. This has got slave labor in it. And in terms of all the conferences I've been to, how can we expect to have any solutions when 95% of the conferences I go to, there's not one person I see who represents or is from the ethnic minorities?
Okay, thank you. Let's leave that there. And we'll take a question as well from the woman in the denim shirt here. We'll come back to that.
Hi there. I had a question for the students that are here today. So we've discussed that there's a real need for behaviour change, and to drive that behaviour change, we're familiar with 2 types of models. So the incentive approach, where you get 25p off your coffee for bringing in a reusable cup, or the disincentive approach, where you get a 5p tax on your plastic bag. As students, what would you like to see the government leading on? The incentive, where it's a perk for opting for sustainable approaches, or the disincentive, where it's the tax?
Brilliant. That's a really good question. Thank you. We'll take the first one first. I mean, I think it's a really good point, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying about smaller, lighter cars. If we build a whole generation of big, heavy cars, even if they are electric, it's still a big drain on the planet. So, Matt, would you like to address that? When I say like, I mean, would you be willing to?
I mean, what I can say in terms of how will the voices of Indigenous people be reflected in this process is that, yes, it is incredibly important, and it is a part of the way the UN process and the COP process is designed. So there absolutely will be opportunities for and ways of bringing Indigenous people into the COP process, both in Glasgow and in the run-up to Glasgow.
He's making a dual point here. One is about Indigenous people, and the other is about resource use. So, we're still digging up loads of materials out of the ground to fuel our very large SUVs. I think he's making 2 points.
No. So I was trying to deal with the first part of it, and the second part. There are significant behavioural impacts that we need to think about in terms of, what we choose to buy and how we live. Obviously, has a huge impact then on what that means for what we need to produce as a world, and that has to be part of what we think about to get towards net zero.
Rosie, a quick thought on this?
Quick thought on this is that we don't yet have any mechanisms that try to assess all these different levels of harm, and that I don't think we will ever get to a position where we do no harm at all. It's a question of doing the least harm and also trying to look at all the issues of equality, because it's disgusting that such things are being mined or worked on by kids who are being paid nothing. And that's a problem not just in the mining industry, it's in the food industry, it's in lots of industries. And we won't get climate change that is workable if we don't get climate justice, and that also has to be really high up the agenda, and you've highlighted one bit.
Okay, Jamie, briefly.
Well, climate justice is incredibly important, but I think the SDGs is one way that we could look
Sustainable Development Goals.
Sustainable Development Goals, which do talk about social justice, climate justice, as well as climate change as a specific issue in itself. So how we can apply scrutiny to the SDGs through things like the COP would also be useful.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm just going to take these to our young people in the audience and raise that other question. Fanny, carrots or sticks?
I think it's more than just carrots or sticks. It's why not change the entire composition of the cup? Why do we need a cup that's half carton and then plastic inside? I mean, incentive or not, even though I have to pay 5p or I get, it's about changing how materials are used. We've talked, to conclude basically, I think products need to change. And it's more than just incentives or disincentives. I think it's how the packaging industry in general works and functions.
Yeah. Okay, let me ask you guys, would you prefer incentives or disincentives? So 10p off for something good or 10p on for something bad? Which is better?
Personally, I think incentives have the most opportunity to bring people and make them aware of what they can do to help prevent the climate crisis. But I also think as well, it also sends back to education, not only for children, but also for adults, as to what they can do, and to have a solutions-based system which shows them these options, like some of the construction stands we've seen here today, are available.
Theo, what would you like to be incentivized to do?
I'd like to be incentivized to cut down on my emissions a lot more. Personally, I've been working very hard to try and travel a lot less and just use less electricity, but there needs to be a lot more incentive other than the financial one. The government should be encouraging people to do individual action a lot more.
Cloud, should you be taxed if you buy too many clothes in a month?
I believe it depends on what brand it comes from, because some are more sustainable than others. But I actually believe the opposite to Theo, because I feel like you shouldn't be rewarding people for something they should already be doing. Instead, you should be doing the opposite.
Rihanna, you got the last word. So one incentive, one disincentive. You got the casting vote here.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Cloud and say disincentive, because, as much as it should be a good thing and it should be rewarded, it should be expected and necessary. However, incentives are a good thing to balance out our reputation in the community.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, yes. Okay, you got your own mic. Yeah.
Cheers. Right. So looking at it as a simple binary choice of incentives and disincentives is not the best way to look at it, I would argue, because you've got to look at the supply and demand curves, how elastic good is, and whether or not the changes should be coming from the supplier or the consumer. So you've got to look at each scenario and think, actually, a mix is best. Like, my town council is looking at incentivizing people to be greener when it comes to events in the marketplace, but in a couple of years, they're just going to ban single-use plastics. So you've got to look at, where are we now, what do we start with, and where are we looking to end up? Because in future, we should hope that we don't need either. But I think when it comes to producers, disincentives are certainly good, because corporations don't seem to like paying too much tax. So if you can make it so that they think they don't need to pay as much if they do the right thing, then there you go.
Thank you very much. When you're in Downing Street, things will be much better, I have no doubt. Theo, your thoughts?
Well, both. Because going back to your analogy of 10p if you do something good or minus 10p if you do something bad, well, if you have both, then people will look at it, if they do the good thing, as they're saving 20p, because otherwise they would have to pay an extra 10p. And it's a really... I'm not using the analogy very well, but basically, if you both desensitize... I can't remember the word. De-insensitize the bad things and insensitize the good things, you don't need to do it to such an extreme.
Yeah, good point. A final thought?
Yeah, a lot of what was said was agreed. I kind of agree with both. And I guess it's also, I don't really know how to word it because I'm not that good at wording things, but maybe also where you're coming from. So if you, I don't know, so 10p might be, oh yeah, I'll just pay 10p and I don't really care where this goes. But some people might be like, oh, that's a lot of money. I know maybe 10p, but different amounts of money, it's where people are coming from. So 10p might be a lot for somebody.
Okay, thank you very much. So look, there's a really varied spread of views there. I'm sorry we didn't come to a clear conclusion there. Have I got time to ask? Okay, one last question, and that was to this man here who I pointed to earlier. But just you're going to have to be very brief.
Very, very quick question. Great that we've got the schools involved. 35 years ago, I was involved as an architect in schools trying to support people being involved in just these sort of issues, but there was no central support. How now are we going to get that investment into the schools? And I would just say that there are networks of professionals now who I'm sure the education system could draw on. Just yesterday, I was talking to the Joint Committee of National Amenities Societies, and there are people there who would be interested. How do we make the links to get the message out so it's not the 75% of teachers who need to be trained in everything, but we can use the people who are out there to support them?
Okay, thank you. Look, this touches on, for me, a really massive issue, which is climate change is so pervasive. We have to be doing everything in every sector of society at the same time in a way that's so complicated it couldn't possibly be managed by a government except a totalitarian one. Jamie? Microphone. One of them's not dead.
Well, it's a good question because Teach the Future, our new campaign to reform the education system around the climate emergency, is only 3 months old. We must have had sort of 20 or 30 people like yourselves come to us and say, how can you help us? Us as in the young people who are driving the campaign. And at the moment, we haven't quite found the right way because the campaign is so new, but technology is there to support us. We operate through Slacks, and anyone could join a Slack and contribute to discussions. And also there's a lot of WhatsApp groups are being created. But there is a WhatsApp group for the strikers movement called Adults Supporting the Strikers. So that might be the way it goes. But you're right that we do need to draw on people's expertise and enthusiasm because we certainly don't have time to reinvent all the wheels.
Rosie, very briefly to close.
Okay, yeah, very, very briefly. This is precisely what our group, Peers for the Planet, in a way has been set up to try to address, which is you have to have climate consideration in building regulations. And at the moment, the big building companies like Persimmon, who make staggering profits, are not building houses that are sustainable, fitted with panels, fitted with batteries. This is probably not that difficult and requires legislative will and people to ask for it, and then it could happen.
Okay. Matt, a final thought?
Yeah, but just on your point that this can't just be for governments, that's absolutely right. And in the planning for the COP, that's why it's so important that businesses, investors, cities, regions, the full range of society is involved. So we very much see this as involving all actors.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got to wind this up. Can we have a big hand for our panel and their inquisitors? Thank you.